What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected voices sits down for what should be a simple interview and finds himself under attack by a host determined to make him the villain? In just 33 seconds of disrespect, Joy Behar managed to push Morgan Freeman past his breaking point, leading to the most shocking walkout in daytime television history. The View studio audience settled into their seats that morning, expecting the usual blend of celebrity chat and lighthearted banter. Morgan Freeman, the man whose voice had narrated countless documentaries, who had played presidents and wise mentors, who had earned every award the industry could offer, walked onto that stage with his characteristic grace. He smiled, waved to the audience, and took his seat at the table. The applause died down. The cameras focused in, and that's when everything started to go wrong. Joy Behar didn't waste time with pleasantries. She skipped right past the usual warmth that guests expect when they sit down on a talk show. No asking about his latest project. No compliments about his legendary career. Instead, she leaned forward with a look that suggested she had an agenda. "So, Morgan," she began, her tone already carrying an edge, "I've been reading some things about you. Some people are saying you're out of touch with what's happening in the world today." The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The audience went quiet. Morgan Freeman's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes. This wasn't a question. This was an accusation dressed up as an introduction. "Out of touch?" Morgan repeated, his voice steady. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that, Joy." "Well," Joy continued, waving her hand dismissively, "you've had this long career, you've been successful, you've made your money. But do you really understand what everyday people are going through right now? Do you get what it's like for regular folks?" Morgan took a breath. He was a professional. He'd handled tough interviews before. "I think I understand quite a bit, actually. I grew up in Mississippi. I know what it means to struggle. I know what it means to work hard for everything you have." "That was decades ago, though." Joy shot back, not even letting his words settle. "Things are different now. You're living in mansions, flying private. When's the last time you pumped your own gas?" The audience murmured. This wasn't going how anyone expected. One of the other hosts tried to jump in, tried to steer the conversation somewhere more reasonable. But Joy kept going. "I pump my own gas," Morgan said quietly. "I do my own shopping. I live my life like anyone else." "Come on," Joy said with a laugh that felt more mocking than amused. "You expect us to believe that? You're Morgan Freeman. You probably have people who do everything for you." "I think you're making a lot of assumptions about who I am," Morgan replied. His voice still measured, still controlled, but anyone watching could see the tension building in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened just slightly. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Joy said, looking around at the other hosts as if seeking backup. "These celebrities come on here and want us to treat them like they're just regular people, but they're not. They live in a completely different world." "Joy, maybe we should talk about Morgan's new film," one of the other hosts suggested, clearly trying to salvage the interview. But Joy wasn't done. "No, I think this is important. I think people need to hear this. Morgan, you've made comments in the past about certain social issues, and frankly, some of them have been pretty tone-deaf. Don't you think you have a responsibility to educate yourself before you speak on things?" Morgan sat back in his chair. He looked at Joy for a long moment. "I've spent my entire life educating myself. I've read, I've listened, I've learned from my experiences and from others. What exactly do you think I'm tone-deaf about?" "Well, for starters," Joy said, leaning in like she was about to land a knockout punch, "you've said that you don't believe in talking about certain subjects because you think we focus on them too much. That's easy for you to say from your position of privilege, isn't it?" "Privilege," Morgan repeated. The word hung in the air. "Let me tell you about privilege, Joy. I was born into poverty. I served my country. I worked odd jobs for years before I got my first real acting role. I faced rejection after rejection. I dealt with discrimination, with doors being slammed in my face, with people telling me I'd never make it. So when I talk about my views, they come from a lifetime of actual experience, not from a place of ignorance." The audience applauded. Some of them stood up, but Joy's face hardened. "That's a nice speech," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But it doesn't change the fact that you're a wealthy, successful man now who doesn't want to deal with uncomfortable conversations." "Uncomfortable conversations?" Morgan's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his composure. "You think I'm afraid of uncomfortable conversations? I've had uncomfortable conversations my entire life. What I don't appreciate is being invited onto a show under the pretense of a respectful interview and instead being ambushed with accusations and insults. Nobody's ambushing you, Joy said. I'm asking legitimate questions. You're not asking questions, Morgan said, his voice firm now. You're making statements and trying to make me defend myself against things I never said or did. You're twisting my words and my history to fit whatever narrative you walked in here wanting to create. The studio went silent. The other hosts looked at each other, clearly unsure how to proceed. The audience sat frozen, watching this unfold in real time. I think you're being oversensitive, Joy said, and there it was. The line that would become the most replayed moment of the entire exchange. Morgan Freeman's face changed. Not with anger exactly, but with something deeper. Disappointment. The realization that this conversation was never going to be productive. That he was sitting across from someone who had already decided who he was without bothering to actually listen to him. Oversensitive, he said softly. You invite me here. You attack my character. You make assumptions about my life, my views, my understanding of the world. You dismiss my experiences. And when I defend myself with calm, measured responses, you tell me I'm being oversensitive. I'm just trying to have an honest conversation, Joy said. But her voice had lost some of its confidence. She could feel the room turning. No, Morgan said, and there was finality in that single word. No, you're not. An honest conversation requires two people who respect each other. It requires listening, not just waiting for your turn to attack. You didn't bring me here to have a conversation, Joy. You brought me here to tear me down, to make yourself look good by making me look bad. That's not true, Joy protested, but the audience wasn't buying it. Neither were the other hosts, whose faces showed their discomfort with the whole situation. Let me ask you something, Morgan said, leaning forward. Have you ever considered that maybe, just maybe, someone can disagree with you without being ignorant? That someone can have a different perspective without being out of touch? That someone can have achieved success without forgetting where they came from? Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Morgan kept going. I've spent decades using my platform to try to make a difference. I've supported causes I believe in. I've mentored young actors. I've spoken about issues that matter to me. And I've done it all while trying to stay true to who I am and where I came from. But apparently, none of that matters to you because I don't fit into the neat little box you've created for how you think I should think and act. Morgan, I think you're taking this the wrong way, Joy said, and there was a nervousness in her voice now. The wrong way? Morgan shook his head. Tell me, Joy, what's the right way to take being disrespected on national television? One of the other hosts jumped in. Let's take a breath here, everyone. I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot. There is no right foot here, Morgan said, but he was looking at Joy, not at the host who'd tried to mediate. This was orchestrated from the start. I can see that now. Nobody orchestrated anything, Joy insisted. I'm a journalist. I ask tough questions. Journalists ask questions to get information, Morgan replied. You ask questions to get a reaction. There's a difference. And you know what? You got your reaction. Congratulations. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of this unraveling interview. I've been doing this show for years, Joy said, and now she was getting defensive. I've interviewed hundreds of people. I know how to do my job. Then do your job with respect, Morgan said. Do your job with integrity. Do your job without assuming that because someone is successful, they must be out of touch. Do your job without trying to score points at someone else's expense. Joy's face flushed red. I don't think you understand how this works. Oh, I understand perfectly, Morgan said. You create controversy to get ratings. You provoke your guests to get viral moments. You sacrifice genuine conversation for sound bites. I understand completely. If you feel that way, maybe you should leave, Joy said. And the moment those words left her mouth, the entire atmosphere changed. The other hosts looked shocked. The audience gasped. Even the crew members visible in the background seemed to freeze. Morgan Freeman sat very still. He looked at Joy for a long moment. Then he looked at the other hosts, who seemed mortified by what their colleague had just said. Then he looked out at the audience, and in his eyes, you could see him making a decision. You know what? He said quietly. You're absolutely right. He stood up, slowly, deliberately, with the dignity that had defined his entire career. He didn't storm off. He didn't yell. He simply removed his microphone, placed it carefully on the table, and straightened his jacket. "Morgan, wait," one of the other hosts said, reaching out. "Please don't go. We can work this out." But Morgan shook his head. "I came here in good faith. I came here prepared to have a conversation, to talk about my work, to connect with the audience. What I got instead was a setup, an attack disguised as an interview. And when I defended myself, I was told to leave. So I'm leaving." "Nobody's forcing you to go," Joy said, but her voice lacked conviction now. "You just told me to leave," Morgan said simply. "So I am. I have too much respect for myself to sit here and be treated like this." He turned to the audience. "Thank you for being here. I'm sorry you had to witness this. You deserve better. Everyone deserves better." And then he walked. Not quickly, not in anger, but with purpose. He walked across that stage, past the cameras, past the crew members who didn't know whether to stop him or let him go. He walked toward the exit, and with each step, the weight of what had just happened seemed to sink in for everyone watching. Joy sat at the table, her face a mixture of defiance and growing realization that this had gone very, very wrong. The other hosts looked at each other, uncertain what to do. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Morgan reached the edge of the stage. He paused for just a moment, turned back, and said one final thing. "I've been in this industry for over 50 years. I've faced challenges, discrimination, setbacks, and triumphs. I've been blessed to work with incredible people and tell important stories. But I cannot sit at a table where someone is more interested in tearing me down than lifting up genuine dialogue. Life is too short, and frankly, I've earned the right to walk away from disrespect." With that, he was gone. The door closed behind him, and the studio erupted into chaos. Some audience members applauded, others sat in shock. The producers scrambled, trying to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show. The other hosts tried to smooth things over, tried to move on to the next segment, but everyone knew this moment would define the episode. Joy sat there, and for perhaps the first time since the interview began, she seemed at a loss for words. She'd pushed too hard, gone too far, and instead of getting the controversial moment she'd apparently wanted, she'd gotten something else entirely. She'd revealed herself live on television as someone who valued confrontation over conversation, who saw a guest not as a person to engage with, but as a target to take down. In the control room, producers knew immediately that this would be everywhere. Social media would explode, news outlets would cover it, everyone would have an opinion. But in that moment, in that studio, all anyone could think about was the empty chair where Morgan Freeman had been sitting just minutes before. The remaining hosts tried to continue. They brought up other topics, made jokes, attempted to restore some normalcy to the show, but it all felt hollow. The energy had shifted. What should have been a celebration of one of cinema's greatest actors had turned into a masterclass in how not to treat a guest, and everyone in that room knew it. As the show cut to commercial, the audience could be heard talking amongst themselves. The consensus was clear. They'd just watched someone with decades of dignity and grace be pushed to his limit, and they'd watched him handle it with more class than the person who'd pushed him there. Morgan Freeman had walked onto that stage as a respected actor coming to promote his work and share his thoughts. He'd been met with hostility, assumptions, and disrespect, and when he defended himself calmly and reasonably, he'd been told to leave. So he did, but on his own terms, with his head held high and his dignity intact. Joy Behar, on the other hand, had revealed something about herself that morning. She'd shown that sometimes the person asking the questions can be more interested in creating conflict than understanding. She'd shown that success in broadcasting doesn't always come with wisdom or grace. And she'd learned, in the most public way possible, that some people will not tolerate being disrespected, no matter how big the platform or how bright the lights. The interview that was supposed to last 20 minutes had imploded in less than 10. What should have been a pleasant conversation between a host and a distinguished guest had become a cautionary tale about the importance of respect, the dangers of assumption, and the power of knowing when to walk away. In those final moments before Morgan left the building entirely, before he stepped into his car and drove away from that studio, he'd made a choice. He'd chosen self-respect over publicity. He'd chosen dignity over playing along. He'd chosen to draw a line and say, clearly and firmly, that this was not acceptable. And in doing so, he'd given everyone watching a lesson that had nothing to do with movies or celebrity or any of the topics that were supposed to be discussed that day. He'd shown that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own humiliation. That standing up for yourself doesn't require yelling or drama. That walking away can be the strongest statement you make. The audience that day got more than they bargained for. They came to see a beloved actor talk about his craft. Instead, they witnessed a moment of truth, raw and unfiltered. They saw what happens when someone confuses antagonism for journalism, when someone mistakes rudeness for honest questioning, and they saw how a person with true character responds when pushed to their limit. Morgan Freeman's empty chair sat there for the rest of the show, a physical reminder of what had transpired. Every time the camera panned across the table, there it was, empty, silent, speaking volumes without saying a word. The other hosts did their best to move forward, but the elephant in the room couldn't be ignored. Joy made a few attempts to justify her approach, to frame her questions as legitimate, but her defenses rang hollow after what everyone had just witnessed. The damage was done, not by Morgan Freeman, but by the way he'd been treated and the way he'd been told to leave when he'd simply asked for basic respect. As the show finally ended and the camera stopped rolling, the studio cleared out. The audience filed out, already pulling out their phones to tell friends and family what they'd just seen. The crew members packed up equipment, talking in hushed tones about the most dramatic moment they'd witnessed in years of working in television. And somewhere outside that studio, Morgan Freeman was free. Free from the hostile environment he'd been placed in. Free from the need to defend his character against baseless attacks. Free from a conversation that had never been designed to be fair or balanced. He'd walked in with grace, endured disrespect with patience, defended himself with eloquence, and left with his dignity completely intact. The same could not be said for the show he left behind, or for the host who'd driven him away. What happens when one of the most respected figures in Hollywood sits down for an interview and encounters hostility instead of hospitality? What happens when someone decides that creating controversy is more important than creating connection? What happens when a host forgets that the person sitting across from them is a human being deserving of respect, not just content to be exploited for ratings? You get a moment like this, a moment that exposes the difference between genuine journalism and performance art disguised as conversation. A moment that shows the world exactly who has class and who simply pretends to. A moment that becomes a dividing line between those who understand that respectful disagreement is possible and those who see every interaction as a battle to be won. Morgan Freeman didn't need to stay in that seat. He'd proven everything he needed to prove over decades of work, of excellence, of using his voice and his talent to make a difference. He had nothing left to prove to Joy Behar or to anyone else. And that's exactly why his decision to leave resonated so powerfully, because it wasn't about ego. It wasn't about being unable to handle tough questions. It was about recognizing when a situation had become toxic, when staying would only validate behavior that shouldn't be validated. It was about knowing his worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. The interview became infamous not because of anything scandalous Morgan had said or done, but because of how clearly it illustrated the difference between someone who commands respect through their actions and someone who demands it through their position. One had earned their place through talent and perseverance. The other seemed to believe that a platform gave them permission to forget basic human decency. In the hours and days that followed, people would analyze every word, every expression, every moment of that exchange. They would debate who was right and who was wrong. They would take sides and share opinions. But for those who were actually there, who witnessed it firsthand, the truth was obvious. They'd watched someone try to make themselves look big by making someone else look small. They'd watched it backfire spectacularly. And they'd watched a true professional show the world how to maintain grace under pressure, how to stand up for yourself without losing your composure, and how to know when the only winning move is to walk away. Morgan Freeman's departure from The View that day wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a moment of strength. It was a statement that no amount of publicity is worth sacrificing your self-respect. It was a reminder that some battles aren't worth fighting because the other side has already disqualified themselves by their own behavior. The empty chair remained, a symbol of what happens when you push someone too far, when you forget that everyone deserves basic respect, when you confuse conflict with content. It served as a reminder that in trying to create a memorable moment, Joy had indeed succeeded, just not in the way she'd intended. She'd created a moment that would be remembered, all right, a moment that would be discussed and dissected and used as an example, but not as an example of hard-hitting journalism or brave questioning, as an example of how not to treat a guest. As an example of what happens when you let your desire for drama override your responsibility to your audience and to the person sitting across from you, and Morgan Freeman, he drove away from that studio with his reputation not just intact, but enhanced. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play a rigged game. Sometimes the strongest move is to simply stand up and leave. And sometimes the person who walks away is the one who truly wins.